Strong Towns has been asking cities to hashtag do the math for over a decade now. But it wasn't until 2025 that some people in Fort Smith realized that Strong Towns has been right this whole time, and now they want to do the math too.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we get somebody like LeVon Morton, a CPA, and another CPA, turn them loose. Say you go to every department, give them access to the computers, everything they want, and see what they come up with.
And serendipitously, Strong Towns noticed Fort Smith.
All right, Andy.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I was thinking about your city all weekend.
I was too.
And Arkansas. Well, I'm an accountant. I'm good with Excel. Let's do some math. There's all kinds of fun math we can do to illuminate our city's finances. I don't know much about taxes or municipal reporting, but I do know some of the basics. On day one of business class in high school, our FBLA teacher taught us about balance sheet ratios. This is where you take a company's balance sheet, look at the ratio between specific numbers on it, and derive some sort of insight on the company. Different industries have different balance sheet ratios that are more important than others. And on April 4th, 2025, Strong Towns released a tool to help anyone analyze the ratios that they think are important for cities. I used that tool, and here's my review of it, as well as my results for Fort Smith, Arkansas. The Finance Decoder is really just a Google sheet that's way less intimidating than it looks. But hunting through my city's financial package for the data, it was a bit of a chore. If you're doing this on your own, definitely read the separate instruction document for help. Even with my background in finance, I found it useful to help me navigate some of the differences in terminology that we use here in Fort Smith. To get access to the workbook and the instructions, you'll have to sign up via email and click a link provided in that email. I'm guessing it will sign you up for their mailing list, but I'm already on their mailing list, so I don't mind. I exported the worksheet to Excel instead of working in Google Sheets, which produced some formatting challenges, but nothing I wasn't able to work around. The tan cells in the workbook indicate that they're places for hard-coded data. This is a general best practice with spreadsheets. It's best not to adjust anything in some spreadsheets except for those tan-colored cells. My other piece of advice is to definitely work backwards from your most recent fiscal year as you copy the data from PDF to Excel. This will help capture corrected numbers if a prior year's financials were ever restated. We had a few for Fort Smith. Another thing is, the spreadsheet uses each column as an entire year, but a balance sheet captures values at a singular point in time, not a range, not an entire year. So some of your reports might say December 31st, and you should think of that date as the entire year. And if a date says January 1st, it's helpful to think of it as the prior year's ending value. Entering the numbers didn't take too long, and the spreadsheet gave me some surprising results. But it's useless to just spit out some charts without attempting to analyze the story that they're conveying. So let's see what we can learn about Fort Smith's finances from the Strong Towns Finance Decoder. Our first chart is the ratio between financial assets and total liabilities. In this chart, a positive trend is considered a good thing because that means we're gaining assets faster than we're gaining liabilities. So good job, Fort Smith. But here's the rub. If you notice that scale on the y-axis, our ratio is still less than 1. This means our city has more liabilities than we can afford to pay, which means we're in a very fragile state. Full stop. We will have to use future revenue, money that we have not even earned yet, to pay for the past due bills that we have now. There's no getting past that unfortunate reality. If we look at the next graph, this uses that same ratio, but it provides a dollar value to our net deficit. We don't have the 2024 numbers just yet, they're still being audited, but as of 2023, the city and its citizens, you and me, have enjoyed $50 million worth of services that the next generation will have to pay for. What this tells me is that we're on a great trajectory, but there's still work left to be done. This next chart paints a little bit of a rosier picture. It's still comparing assets to liabilities, but this time we're looking at all assets. And when I say all assets, that means, unlike the previous charts, this one includes a lot of assets like infrastructure that we can never actually sell. If we're in a bind, we can't sell Midland Boulevard to Greenwood. So when we look at assets like this, I view it as an overstatement of our financial health. I like to see the positive slope on this one, but I'm still a little pessimistic because we were on a downward trend until 2020. And when I think about 2020, I think about some of the factors at play that year with the pandemic. The unemployment rate went from 3.2% to 4.5%. We partially redeemed a sales and use tax bond for $6.6 million. And we just generally started to see an explosion of sales tax revenue around that time as well. So I'm cautiously optimistic here, but our slope here is still only barely positive. It should be a lot healthier than this. The next chart is much better to look at, and it's the relationship between our city's revenue and our debts. If you think of this in terms of your household income, it's like looking at how much is on your credit card bill and how much is your annual income. So if you make $50,000 a year and your credit card bill is also for $50,000, your ratio would be 1. And that's the ratio that Fort Smith had in 2019. We've luckily been trending downward since then, a trend that I hope we see continue. This next chart is related to the last one, very similar, but instead of tracking the total outstanding balance on the credit card, it's tracking how much we're paying in interest as a factor of our total revenue. Part of this decline is due to our redeeming bonds over the years. We paid off an entire bond in 2022 for $12.6 million. But also this chart is a reflection of declining interest rates at historic levels since 2009. So I think Fort Smith is on a good track here, but we need to keep outside factors like interest rates in mind. Who knows when or if they'll ever go back down again. The next chart is my favorite because a financial analyst can read a set of books like ours and use them to deduce how many potholes or leaky pipes a city might have, which is amazing to me. This isn't a perfect measurement, but it's a nifty, rough hack to glimpse our backlog of deferred maintenance. The way this works is, just for a little hypothetical, let's say we spend $100,000 on some pipes. That $100,000 is the original value and it's an asset. Now, our city's finance office knows that pipes break down over time and pipes have a useful life for a certain number of years, let's say 50. So every year, our finance officer takes 1/50th of that $100K, so that's $2,000, and he expenses it. And when I say expense, that means we take it off of the assets and we move it down to the income statement. So now our books show the pipe is only worth $98,000. This new $98,000 is our book value. So this graph takes all the assets in the city and compares their book value with their original value. If we see a downward slope like this, it indicates that we're not keeping up with basic maintenance as we should. If you're like me and see that our assets are growing every year, but our ability to maintain them is decreasing, you might think like I do that a situation like the consent decree becomes an inevitability. We could have seen it coming if we had been doing the math. And by the way, this is also a sign that even if we magically get bailed out by the governor for the consent decree, we're still going to have another consent decree in a few decades. Unless this line is going upwards, a consent decree is an inevitability. And finally is the graph I call the bailout score. A higher number here means that we're more dependent on outside help. That big spike in 2021 is, I think, pandemic relief aid, and we seem to have fortunately used that money to improve our net financial position in Fort Smith. A lot of other cities got that same aid and they squandered it. But this is a fun graph for some people to see. We sometimes think that we're fiercely independent and covering our own burden that we cast on society. But when you look under the hood, it usually shows that that's not the case. I don't think this number is particularly bad for Fort Smith. Grants are an important tool for every city. The important thing here is that we don't use them to create new liabilities that we can't afford to pay. So that's it. I think these trends are really interesting, and I don't want to assign blame to anyone, but I am biased and this channel is about traditional development patterns, and I think these charts overwhelmingly show that our speed-first development patterns from the second half of the 20th century are beginning to choke us. We can reallocate this or cut that program, but the only long-term solution is to return to the traditional development patterns that financially proved themselves in Fort Smith for over 150 years before we gave them up. Repave that alley, fill in the potholes, fix the leaks. No new roads until we can prove that we can pay for the ones we already have.